Hey everyone, welcome to the Sustain the Range podcast. I'm Lauren, your host, and this podcast is a personal exploration of my experiences in everything ranching. From beef operations to training horses to sustainable farming and regenerative practices, we'll cover it all. Each episode features enlightening conversations with guests who bring their unique perspectives and expertise. Whether they're seasoned ranchers or first-generation farmers, we all share a common bond and deep appreciation for the land and the livestock we raise. Tune in each week for engaging discussions, inspiring stories, and practical insights from the ranching community, and let's embark on this incredible journey together. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode. In this episode, we dive deep into the world of cattle production with none other than Steve Campbell, a seasoned expert in the cattle industry. With a lifetime of experience under his belt, Steve brings a wealth of knowledge and insights into the complexities of producing premium beef. As a trusted advisor and cattle coach, Steve has worked closely with producers to optimize their operations, covering everything from soil health and forage production to nutrition, stock selection, and calving strategies. During our conversation, Steve and I explore a wide range of topics, from the fundamental principles of cow health and nutrition to practical advice for aspiring beef entrepreneurs looking to start their own herds. Whether you're a seasoned rancher or just beginning your journey in the cattle industry, this episode is packed with valuable insights and actionable tips to elevate your operation. So join us for an engaging discussion filled with Steve's invaluable expertise and passion for all things cattle related. This was one of my favorite episodes and interviews so far, and I learned so much from Steve's advice. And just a little side note, I do apologize. The audio isn't the best in this episode. I did the best that I could with editing, but it might be a little bit echoey at points, but you can still hear both of us, and it's a really great episode, and I hope you guys enjoy as much as I did. So here goes. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here, and I know that our audience is going to love this conversation. So I appreciate you being here. Welcome to Sustain the Range podcast.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I hope that we'll share a little information that can help people get their land back to fertility and animal, plant, human health.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And I first got introduced to you and on YouTube, actually, because my boyfriend started watching your videos and he pulled me in, and I think for about almost 2 weeks, probably watched every YouTube thing possible that you were on YouTube. And we just found it so valuable, all of the information and knowledge that you're sharing and everything. So I'm really excited to talk to you. But I just wanted to give you a little chance to introduce yourself. If you could just tell us, where you're from, where you grew up, how you got into agriculture, things like that.
I kind of want to go back to your comment there. I have collected a lot of this information. A little bit of it I've come up with on my own, but 150-year-old to more modern books, and then a number of great mentors. So I'm just sharing a lot of things that I learned from other people. Chip Hines, who's since passed, one of his favorite expressions is putting an old head on young shoulders. So I really like that. Anyway, I was born about 110 miles north of where I live now in the mountains. My dad was ranching there at the time when he got married. Let's see. Once his brother got married, there was not a large enough ranch for two of them to make a living, and Dad got into the trucking business, hauling cattle, and I pretty much grew up with that until I was 33. I had bought the trucks back when I was 25, and Dad had bought another ranch, and he'd moved back to New Meadows, where I was born. Anyway, then he died, and I sold the trucks and moved to the ranch. So I grew up around cattle, kind of the smelly end of them in the trucks. And then I got to enjoy the grass and the smell of the clover and that sort of thing there in New Meadows. And when I first moved back up, I was just running yearlings for somebody out of California. They'd bring them in the spring and we'd weigh them out in the fall and you got paid by the pound. So kind of learned how to grow more grass and better grass and put pounds on animals. In 1989, I started getting and reading the Stockman Grass Farmer, and I still do to this day. I guess that's the longest publication that I've subscribed to. But I started hearing about grass finished beef. And I broke my right ankle really bad in January of 99 in a horse accident. And 6.5 months in an external fixator, they're telling me you're going to have to get a desk job. You won't be able to walk around. And about 2.5 years later, I'm beginning to believe them. Anyway, I went to see a different kind of a doctor. He was a chiropractor, a certified applied kinesiologist, but an expert in nutrition. He said, stop eating that inflammatory food, sugar, flour, concentrated carbohydrates, if you will, GMOs, that's what. Start eating the non-inflammatory foods. And within 10 days, this pain that I just couldn't get away from for almost 3 years was gone.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, how does that work in the soil, in the plants, in the animals, and then for human health? And so I had 3 train tracks going all the time. I'd learned something on the soil side. Oh, that's going to work for cattle or humans, or something about cattle or something about humans. And one of the first things, the second book that I read once I met this doctor was Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Dr. Weston A. Price. He was a dentist 120 years ago, and he was seeing so much facial deformity and cavities, he thought it must be something in the environment, something in the diet. And in the 1930s, well, I guess we're not there yet, in the 2030s, he went around the world, found 14 groups of people still eating in the old way, nothing modern Western processed in their diet. It was how they grew and prepared their food. A lot of that was fermentation. Heat, moisture, slight acidity, a little bacteria, and time. So they fermented a lot of these foods, which made whatever was in the food a lot more bioavailable. There was no rhyme or reason to the amount of fat, protein, carbohydrate in their diet. Minimum fat 30%, Eskimos 80%. The common denominator in the 1930s was that all of those groups are getting 5 to 10 times the vitamins and minerals. I just have a Redmond real salt here. Anyway, the minerals that are missing in our soils, rain, farming practices, things like that. So that was a big deal in learning how to get around some of the health issues that I had been seeing when I had first moved back to New Meadows. And this is probably too detailed of an answer.
No, keep going. It's great. I love it. This is great.
So once I figured out that big ag was not our friend, there was a book called Fateful Harvest, written by Duff Wilson, kind of an Aaron Brockovich sort of a reporter out of Seattle. The mayor of Quincy, Washington, she and Duff, they showed that when was this? This had been in the 90s, that the local co-op was putting toxic metals in the fertilizer, and plants didn't grow or grew poorly. Animals got sick or died, and they were able to prove that. Well, when I decided I wanted nothing from China going into the minerals, going into my cattle, I started grass finished beef probably 3 or 4 years before I got that book. Anyway, the problems just melted away. And so I've been a real advocate. I've been real adamant about nothing from China, because almost every individual mineral coming out of China has cadmium in it. Mm-hmm. And in cattle, it screws up their ability to regulate internal body temperature. So they're too cold in the winter, they require more feed. they're too hot in the summer when the bull shows up, and they don't breed as well. I should let you ask a question at this point.
No. This is awesome. I appreciate you sharing all that because I talk a lot about this on the podcast and certain episodes, and I'll be releasing a couple more here in the next couple of months. But just so I have I kind of came into all this holistic health stuff in a different way. I grew up eating pretty healthy. My parents, usually have home cooked meals and everything, and not too many processed foods. And then I got to college and, started kind of having my own little diet. And then, what really threw me into to learning a lot about just our medical system and the big ag and our food system is my mom got cancer. And it was after that, when she passed away, that I said, something's not right. Our medical system, it doesn't seem to be, we're just putting a Band-Aid over it. And then I started getting into holistic health. I did an integrative nutrition certification and things like that. And that's when I really started learning, just like what you were talking about what's in our soil, things that are coming from other countries that, aren't good. And then, what are things that we can do about it. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. So you were kind of touching on a little bit of the soil health stuff since you brought it up. How have you kind of implemented that, on your ranch or at other ranches, and what's kind of your I guess your thoughts on how we can improve the soil from what it is right now?
Well, a lot of people have heard Gabe Brown, the five principles, and then they added a sixth, which was context. But armor on the soil, living root as long as possible. Every spring, when the farmers start stirring dirt, they're throwing off CO2 in the air, and your plants can sequester that CO2 as carbon in the soil. So if you have a living root, diversity of species, minimal disturbance, and then animal impact. So I think I said the five in maybe not in the right order. Some things that I say go kind of along that line. You want to graze long, narrow strips. So if my hands are two plants out there and you graze this one and not this one is telling the biology in the soil, hey, keep it coming. I need that same thing I've been getting. I'm going to need a little manganese to make a seed head. This one's going, no. We need that stuff we were getting 40, 60, 80 days ago. So you've got this war going on underground. I don't know, I'm trying to do my hand, with the biology, which they're not all working in your favor. Every year there's an oxen pulling contest in Canada. One year, the best oxen pulled almost 8,000 pounds on a sled. Number two was a little over 7, and then on down. Well, they had the ribbon ceremony, and they thought, wonder what they could pull if we hitched them together. So adding up what they did individually was just about 15,000 pounds. By hooking them together, they pulled 26,000 pounds. So if you have long, narrow strips and the animals graze this one and trample the other one, now you've insulted all the grass. The ones they don't like got a bigger insult because they didn't get any saliva to help heal them, to help them regrow. All the biology is getting the same signal. It was the first time in my life I ever had cattle eating slough grass, sedge grass. It usually gets really woody, if you will, in the middle of the summer. Cattle won't. They would eat it in the middle of the summer because the mineral content growing rapidly. Johnson-Su bioreactor, Johnson-SU bioreactor. That's a homemade deal, all open source. You're the only person that makes money if you want to take the time. JADAM is another it's a kind of a shortcut. It's not as good, but if you need to do something right now, you can have that done in less than a week and spray that. Um, there is a hour and 30-minute long video, I think, called Back to Eden Film. The word film is in there, backtoedenfilm.com. And it's about how this fellow on the Olympic Peninsula used the tree trimmings from the power company to create soil fertility. He'd let that compost, and it's pretty crazy. He'd put it 6 or 8 inches deep, lay down cardboard, put it 6 or 8 inches deep on the cardboard, and over here he didn't do anything. And a year later, he could take where the compost was, he could take his hand and dig down into the dirt. This he could hardly scratch with his fingers.
Huh.
And that's a very interesting one. And then I always like things, they're natural, they work, and don't cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well, 5 pounds of sea salt foliar every 50 days during the growing season does some tremendous things. In the mineral box or on our salad, the sea salt, about 20% bioavailable. But attached to a carbon atom through a plant, they're 90% bioavailable. And that's, well, those are some simple things. I guess I would add on to Gabe Brown's list of 5, and then they put context. Where do you live? Every
Right.
zip code's different. So okay.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned the Johnson T method. So at the Montana ranch that I was at, he bought the ranch, and then within a year he started applying the compost extract. He started with the Johnson T, and then he added a little bit to it, just to obviously make it. And he experimented quite a bit with it over a couple of years. And kind of took away and added things. But when I got there, he had increased his topsoil about, I think, 3 to 4 inches in maybe a year and a half, 2 years.
Wow.
Just using that compost extract and applying it, the foliar method, and then mix it all up, put it into a sprayer, and then apply it, anywhere from 7 p.m. at night, overnight, just based on when the plants are going to be to absorb it the most and whatnot. And it was pretty amazing how much I learned there just from seeing his composting process. And he would take the soil samples and analyze it under the microscope every day for the nematodes and all that, and seeing the activity there. But it was really, really quite incredible. And when I talk about this stuff for people that aren't in agriculture, or aren't, doing something with the soil, I always try to make a parallel to say, even if you don't even know what a nematode is, or if you are living in the city, what we're doing here on the soil really does matter, because going back to what you were talking about in the very beginning, that, it's our soils that need to be healthy. If we have healthy soils, we have healthy animals, plants, people, environment, everything is so connected. So, I love that you're talking about, promoting nature in the way that the natural flow of things, and mineralizing the soil, because, those things really do matter, and they matter to every living being here on earth, right? So
Yes.
I would love to kind of talk a little bit about your cattle operation, and then I really want to get into the Red Solo Cup idea, because I, have recently watched a number of your webinars talking about that, and my partner and I have been out, looking at the herd and implementing those tips that you've given us. So I'd love to talk a little bit, for if you could just kind of share, what TaylorMade Cattle is about, how you've kind of grown it over the years, and then, where the Red Solo Cup idea came from. So whichever one you want to start with.
No, 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 no. So I used to call the beef that I did Triangle C beef, because my brand is a It would look like this.
Okay,
So
nice.
see.
Yeah. Love it.
Anyway, but that didn't really mean a whole lot. And I was getting ready for a conference, and they wanted me to do a day-long presentation, and I'm like, I need a name that kind of says more about what I do. Well, whether you live on the Mexican border or in Bismarck or on the coast or uh, in 7,000 feet in Colorado, you've got 5 inches of rain or you've got 50 inches of rain. Every one of those situations requires a slightly different kind of an animal. And a really good book to read is Nourishment by Fred Provenza, and the concept of home field advantage, an animal born there. But I came up with, well, let's tailor make animals for your zip code. And so then I started calling it tailor-made beef and tailor-made cattle. The cattle was the consulting side, and my start there came from Gerald Fry, who probably started consulting in about 1995. First time I worked with Gerald was in 2007. We went to a ranch in Nebraska that had 1,400 cows. First day, we visually assessed them, and 1,125 would not work for this meat program. The next 2 days, we linear measured and ultrasounded 275, and 50 more fell out. And no wormer, no shots to the 225 for this meat program. Do whatever you want on the others, 1175, and they wormed those 1175, and they found they had to start feeding them hay. They were in separate bunches. It's not that the 225 had more acres per cow. It was just they had to start feeding hay. And 3.5 months after Gerald and I were there, the ranch owner called Gerald and said, I just sold 900 of those cows you didn't like, because I could see all they were going to do is cost me money the rest of their life.
Hmm.
I guess one of the four. I raised grass finished beef for 20 years. And there's stories around that. I quit in 2020, but learned quite a bit about every direction you could think of there. And the meat to bone ratio, you've got a 700-pound carcass, 50% meat to bone ratio, that's 350 pounds of meat to sell. 60%, that's 420, and 70%, which I exceeded many times, that's 490 pounds of meat to sell off of that same 700-pound carcass. Well, that animal that was really short and wide and deep had a higher meat to bone ratio than the one that was tall and long and just kind of a tube. Mm-hmm. And 10 years ago, 4 out of 5 places that would call wanting me to come and consult were around grass finished beef. But today, 4 out of 5 places that call looking for some consultation, they want a more fertile cow that costs less to run. That cow works good for both things.
Okay.
So you're trying to get one that works just on your grass with minimal inputs until you can make your grass like Gabe Brown's, and then you won't need any inputs.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to what you said about how the cow, the fertility thing and genetic side of things can also work for the grass finished beef, because that's one of the things that I really want and hope to grow is, and what I helped with at the Montana Ranch was, the direct to consumer marketing and selling the beef. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think, or just actually, here's a question. What if you were wanting to build a grass finished beef business, what do you look for in a cow specifically to be able, and say you're just starting out, so you're going to buy cows, you don't have any yet. What are the types of things that you look for in the cow, and what are the things that you think, a producer can do to be able to be successful in that, knowing obviously it's going to take a couple of years depending on what you buy, but yeah, what kind of thoughts on just starting out there?
Well, you need a piece of meat that's tender and flavorful,
Mhm.
or your customer's not coming back. So that
Right.
in this deal, finding the customers is typically the hardest thing for a rancher to do, because they're usually just out on their horse or with their dog and irrigating or riding the range or whatever. So that mindset of how to find a customer and then how to keep them, well, it's got to be tender and flavorful. Um, Tender, fine bones, really small diameter front cannon bones from the knee down, and they taper out just ever so slowly to the width of the ankle.
Right.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to use the solo cup in a different way. The knee would be up here and the ankle down here. You want that bell bottom look to the front. I was reading a book that was written in 1868, and it was the first place I heard about a pointed pole. And about as small as I've seen on a cow is you took you took a golf ball, cut it in half, and put it right up on top of the head. So you just got this little bump sitting up there. That also is related to fine bones. A small diameter tail. There's something about fertility with that. But these fine bones, the fine features, small pointed ears, um, all of those are really going to tell you about tender meat. Okay. Um, a very close second would be the number of vertical folds in the hide of the animal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard you
And
talk about that before.
typically they start in the neck, and the further back they go, the better. If you ever find a cow or a heifer with a lot of vertical folds, this would be the back end of the heads over here.
Mm-hmm.
Find a lot of vertical folds from the vulva down to the udder, they almost always turn into really good cows. But that would be a lot of butter fat, but it'd also be tender meat. Flavorful, the ones that shed the earliest, their gland system is the most adapted to their environment. So generally, they're going to be the most flavorful animals.
Okay.
So in the spring of the year, if I had animals, steers or heifers, I wasn't going to keep as cows. I'd always find the ones that I was going to harvest the earliest in the spring. They'd been on the worst feed, the hay in the winter. I would harvest the early shedders in the spring for that extra flavor that they would bring, because by the end of June or the end of October, that grass could help you out there with flavor.
Okay.
Couple of things about fat. The grain system says the flavor's in the fat, which is true, because rarely do they try to feed the best grain to a steer. It's the lowest quality grain, the higher quality grain, which most of us get too much of, because very few of us work on a threshing crew anymore and just don't expend that many calories. But getting this clean, mineral rich interuterine environment, that's a fertility thing. But if you're feeding the animals with the detox clay, so we're going to get the neighbor's toxins out of the animals, and then a lot of sea salt, whether we're putting it on the grass, in the mineral box, making this mineral water deal, you can add flavor to the meat. A friend from New Hampshire called one time, and he'd already been doing his own grass finishing for 7 or 8 years. And he said, my own meat is starting to bother my stomach.
Hmm.
Well, Tom, I'll send you some of mine. And he called me up in 2 weeks. How come I can eat yours, but I can't eat mine? And I said, Tom, I think it's the conditioner pulling the aftertastes and the after effects of the neighbor's toxins. The neighbor, across the road, across the county, across the state, Fukushima cesium cloud from half a world away. Somebody somewhere upwind is probably not your friend. And the Redmond conditioner, and let's see, here's the human version, the Redmond clay. It's just, can you read that?
Yep. Redmond clay ready to mix bentonite clay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a conditioner is the ag grade of that. It's just it's the same stuff as the clay. It's handled differently. Excuse me.
And how do you apply that, the conditioner? Do you do it the foliar method or?
No, that it kind of makes a mud ball. That's hard to do. You typically do it dry. It depends
Okay.
on how intensive, how few acres, or how extensive, how many acres. Extensive, you can't afford to do the ground. You just have to run it through the cow.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Anyway, about 5 months later, Tom called and he said, I can now eat my own grass finished beef again. He had started feeding the clay to the finishing animals.
Wow.
I don't even know how I got down that rabbit hole there. Sorry, Lauren. What bring me back was you would ask?
Yeah, I had asked what to look for in to if you're starting your own grass finished beef herd.
Okay.
So yeah, you were explaining the cannon bones and the
Early
folds.
shedding small bones, unusually small bones for the size of the animal. And then Jersey meat is excellent, but there's just not a lot of it on the bones. So
Okay.
you want, well, if you live down in Texas or Louisiana, you don't want to bring an animal from Nebraska or North Dakota down there because they'll burn up in the heat. It's down south. If you were to cut an animal, well, if this is the cow again, here's the head. If you were to cut it in two like this and then look at the cross section, down south, you need an oval. We got to get rid of heat, dissipate heat. Up north, we need an O. We've got to retain heat. So the meat to bone ratio is going to be higher up north than it is down south, but the quality can be exactly the same.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
So early shedding, fine bones, and then a beefier package.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And how do you think genetics play into this? Like if I'm looking to do this, how much do I have to focus on genetics in terms of this, or is it kind of separate?
Yeah, it's okay. I was thinking to myself, this probably get me in trouble, but it's okay. It's just the truth. Gerald ran around the world for about 15 years without ultrasound, and about a year and a half before he died, he said, I can tell you two things on average. Absolutely. There is more meat in Black Angus on average. There's better meat quality in Red Angus. So the breeds that have not been messed with as much would tend to be more tender and more flavorful. The more you went for growth, the faster growing, the tougher the meat is. Implants, that sort of thing, that affects all of that. But if you can go cherry pick for the tender meat indicators, Gerald gave a talk March 29th of 2004, I guess. So here we are 20 years later about how to visually identify tender, flavorful beef on the hoof. One of the most interesting talks I'd ever heard. And I used to spend money on ultrasound. And finally, I don't know how many years in, I want to make sure that nobody got a tough piece of meat. Mm-hmm. I don't remember how many years in, I had scored them all using Gerald's stuff. Then I watched the ultrasound technician, not Gerald, do it, and I'm scoring them as I'm watching that. I left my other my visual score at the house, so I wouldn't be. I wrote them down, and the technician kind of finally was getting what it was I was doing. Then I cut them all out and pasted them in a little spiral bound, book, and mailed them to Gerald and asked him to score them. And we were off a quarter or half a point on some of them. When we started, I thought I had one that was marginal. Looking at the ultrasound, I had one that was marginal. Gerald said I had one that was marginal. And that was the last year I spent any money on technology to find out about the meat. I use these things that our daddies, great granddads, that sort of thing used to know way back in the day before industry didn't want us to know that, so we would need to use their products.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's that can be applied to a lot of different things, right?
Yes.
Um so yeah, I would love to we watched, and I don't remember which webinar it was that you did, but you talked a lot about the hair whorls and how to identify fertility. And it was really funny because we went out there a couple days later after we watched it, and we learned about, you know, how to identify the different hair whorls, and, you know, where they are in the forehead, and if they're higher above the eye or lower above the eye. And we were, because if it's lower, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's lower, if the hair whorl is lower below the eye, it means that they're more docile. And then if
Yes.
they're the higher, okay. And
And that was Temple Grandin. She's the
okay.
one that did.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that from Temple Grandin. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we went out there, and we have a couple of neighbors' cows that we always are say, oh, you know, they're the crazy bunch, and all of their hair whorls were higher than the other ones. So it was really cool. But just the whole you know, identification of like how you can see it in the cow, you know, and when you talk about, you know, the different I think it was if the scar, they have the longer scar on their face, it means more or less fertility. Less fertility,
Less.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
The pituitary, that pineal hair whorl, well, hopefully down here,
Yeah.
and the testes and ovaries are all developed at the same time in utero. So
Okay.
if you see a problem here, a scar, and you know, a water buffalo look, instead of a star, I don't have anything right here that looks like a star, but the hair going 360. Uh, there's a lower fertility in the scar than there is in the star.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say on the fertility, Ken Redmond well, he lives in Sydney, Montana. He's linear measured more cattle than any man alive or dead. Uh, he only used 9,500 head, made sure they were all one breed anywhere from Mexico to Canada. Three commonalities with cows that had had 10 or 11 calves in a row without skipping. Three phenotypic similarities. A bigger belly, a bigger belly. So if the cow's head's over here, a bigger belly than the herd average. Steve says they could eat and digest enough for three in a drought or after they lost their teeth. A wider butt than the herd average. Well, that's calving ease and fleshing ability. And then more slope from hooks to pins.
Mm.
Got my handy dandy pelvis here.
Yeah.
The flatter, the flatter it is, very infertile cow, hard to calve, that sort of thing. But the more slope you have, cow's head would be over that way. The more it slopes down, and then the tail would round down off of this end. And you can kind of see that's a fairly wide opening in that pelvis.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the very most important to get that 9th, 10th, 11th calf. That you really had to have that. If you could only look for one thing shape wise for fertile cows, the more slope, the better. You look at wild game, you look at Coriandes or Longhorns or something that hasn't been messed with. They have a whole lot more slope than the red and black Angus that we've tried to make beefier. Well, we've flattened that tail out. We've made them less fertile by trying to do that. So there's a balancing act. But I do want to say that slope from hooks to pins. When I was young, now I can't see. somebody described bull and a cow as two opposite triangles there, right triangles. The if you had a bull with wide shoulders, that would give you a cow with a wide rump. And I was looking at those triangles, it's like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'd be trying to describe the cow, the shape of this cow, and I'd have a styrofoam or a plastic cup in my hand. And one day I had a red Solo cup in my hand, and the head's over here, and I'm like, well, I'm going to change the name of this talk to this Solo cup cow. But if the head is on this end, the bull looks like this. Everything is bigger as you go forward.
Okay.
So the head's over on this end, on both of them. And the cow is bigger as she goes back. Well, on level ground, the more fertile cows should look like they're walking downhill because of the strength of estrogen. Estrogen shuts off long bone growth in the front end of the cow first versus the bull, again, heads over here. Testosterone shuts it off in the back end of the bull first.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily want a bull with no guts. One time I had called Gerald, said, I've got a bull here. I really like his front end, but boy, he just doesn't have much of a rump or guts on him. And he goes, I think, this is obviously way before your time. He said, I think every defensive player in the NFL knew how big Jim Brown's shoulders were. I doubt there was one of them could have told you what size pants he wore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So think of big running backs now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or somebody like that. But anyway.
Right.
Did we get, almost everything is opposite between bull and cow, except for the slope from hooks to pins. If you've got a bunch of cows like this, you got to go find a bull with a lot of slope. If you hope to fix this, you've got to find a bull with this. That is hard to do.
So you want both the cow and the bull to have the slope.
Yes.
Okay.
That is the one main, there's some little exceptions, but the one main thing that goes from cow to bull, slope from hooks to pins.
Okay.
And very few people are paying attention to that. So if this is the hook bones here, I don't know how to do this, and here's the backbone. As they walk, you want those hook bones rotating up above the backbone.
Mm-hmm.
Shoulder blade, you want it every time they weight that shoulder blade, you want it coming up above the backbone on the front end. Okay. So same on both ends. It's easier to find in the front end than the back end. People have not paid attention.
Yeah, and a question that I just thought of on something that I had watched a couple of weeks ago was the traditional, in terms of fertility, the way that I guess the cattle industry and producers have been looking at things is, okay, well, my cow didn't breed up. It has to be the bull's problem, right? It's the bull that's the issue and this and that. And then it seems like I want to know your thoughts on this, in the last several years that we're starting to maybe look at the cow and seeing how that the cow is being affected. Obviously, what they're eating and the soil and the minerals and removing toxins, you've got all of that down. But what are your thoughts on that? Is that true? Is that not true? What should we be looking at this point, going forward in 2024?
Great question. Mom and Dad got married in 1950. And Dad said, Joanne, my mother, whatever you do, when you get to Lauren's place, do not ask her how many cows she's got. It's like,
oh, right.
How much money do you have in the bank?
Yeah.
count the bulls, multiply times 50, and you'll be real close on the number of cows.
Okay.
So it's Pottinger's cats. Are you familiar with Pottinger's cats? Okay, so no. He was doing adrenalectomies on cats to try to get adrenal out of cattle desiccated down so all of the pills were of the same strength, if you will. And so they were running them on cats. Well, they had the cats in two different places, and one place everything was working good, but the other place it wasn't. Well, what they figured out, one place they were getting raw meat and raw milk. In the other place, they were getting cooked meat and cooked milk. Some of the cats in the cooked meat, cooked milk didn't even make it through the adrenalectomy. They would die. In 4 generations, they couldn't reproduce. Each generation of bad diet took 3 generations of clean diet, of good diet, clean and mineral rich. So I got the conditioner over here, sea salt. That's what I want to do it with. Anyway, so we've kind of put these dings in the DNA over the generations of dirty from the neighbor and low mineral gestation periods. All right. So a friend, I'm just going to say, he got his herd of cows all cleaned up. Takes 120 days to change out all the red blood cells. So we get them clean, mineral rich, probably for 6 months. And the bull comes along, and now we've got Junior in utero for 9 months, clean, mineral rich. Junior is at mom's side, grows up, gets bred. Okay, so now I don't think I have, sorry, I'm going to use something different. Here's Junior that got bred, clean, mineral rich. Now we've got 42 juniors in a herd of 275 cows. So you include 42 of these out of these other cows here, okay?
Sure.
Added in, there's 42 of these first calf heifer calves, and what would that be, 120 whatever out of the older cows. That fall, he said, if you went out and picked my 50 best calves, I guarantee you at least 35 are out of those first calf heifers. Rarely do you get 2 best calves out of your first calf heifers. So I was just talking to that same fellow, kind of a jumping ahead here, but last year, his breed up, he's in Northwest South Dakota. He was 14% open in his older cows, and he was kind of complaining. The vet said, "Oh, you're twice as bred up. The next best place might be 25% open, down to 50, and we have one place that was 60% open, and he's at 14%. Well, it was a sea salt, yada yada yada. His first calvers breeding back to have the second calf. Okay, so he'd been doing some of this clean, mineral rich, and he's got that going on in these first calvers now. He was 4% open.
Wow.
What he had done is he'd made the mineral water. And if you want to know how to make mineral water, there's a 2-minute long video, YouTube, mineral water, Steve Campbell. The only thing I wish that I had said differently in that video was I wish I'd used the words out of balance instead of the word imbalanced. Everything else I was very particular about. Anyway, and then I just had another guy yesterday tell me about how good his breed up was with the mineral water. Different, yeah, we're kind of getting off topic
Is
here.
that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Is the mineral water something that you give to them all the time, or is that during certain points of the season?
Someone asked that at the last school that I was doing, and I said, well, what days or months of the year do you want your cattle healthy?
Okay, got it.
There are times of year when it's not very easy to do. There are places where you don't have the ability to make it. They're drinking out of a creek or a river or ponds, and so you just can't do it. But if you can, if you have one tank, it's not metal and it's on a float. You just, Monday you put the tea bag in, Tuesday you take it out, Wednesday you fresh salt, tea bag in, take it out, Thursday in, Friday out, Saturday go to church, Sunday start over on Monday. That works pretty well. And that's what the fellow in Northwest South Dakota did. It was just the every other day because they just had one tank where those heifers were, or
Okay.
heifers, and then but their first calvers to breed back for their second calf. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
YouTube mineral water, Steve Campbell. It's
Okay.
2 minutes long. You can watch it however many times you want to. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Um, So one, just to kind of change gears a little bit, I would love to get your thoughts on what you think of semen testing. So I'm asking this question because I went to a ranch about an hour from here last week or the week before, where the vet was there doing semen testing on the bulls. So I got exposed to it a little bit. I hadn't really seen that done before. I got to help out a little bit, which was fun. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on it. Is it necessary? Should we be doing it? What do you think?
You're going to have a hard time getting away from doing semen tests because the buyers want to know that, well, what is it?
Sure.
Herd Bull Fertility by James Drayson. If you want to know about bulls, that's probably the best one to start with. Anyway, if you've got hair standing on the pole of a bull, it's a period of low or no fertility.
Okay.
So you've got 10 bulls and 2 of them have hair standing in the winter and the other 8 don't. Well, the 2 that are probably going to be the lowest scoring on the semen test. But maybe it's froze their testicles. There's a whole bunch of different things. If you're feeding grain, and most people that develop bulls feed grain, you are putting fat cells in the scrotum, in the testicles. So now you've put insulation around the thermoregulatory system, and the testicles can't stay as cool in the summer when they're supposed to be 3.5 degrees colder than the body. And you put a bunch of fat cells in there, so the volume of semen is going to be down as well.
Okay.
I never feed any grain, and every time I take a bull to semen test, they're like, "Oh man, look at the volume here," or look at these. There's hardly any abnorms. Look at all this motility. Is everybody that goes to test bulls, they feed grain. They're taking away from the long-term productivity of that bull for the person who buys the bull.
Okay.
So I was talking to a bull seller, and we were trying to come up with some wording. Is this like, did you buy the BS last year, or did you actually get a bull last year? Anyway, you're gonna have to do that. The age at which you do the cleaner, more mineral rich the animal, the higher they'll score, and the higher percentage of the bulls will pass.
Okay.
The more toxic, the more cadmium, the lower the mineral, the lower the scores will be, and the fewer percentage will pass. And the more grain you feed, the fewer the percentage would pass.
Okay. Yeah, interesting.
We could talk about that for a couple hours, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's fine, and thank you. And what was one other question? Oh, going back to the hair standing up on the pole, that is true also for looking at a cow, right? To see if they're in gestation. I think it's close to calving. If the hair is standing up, it's a bull. If it's coming down, it's opposite.
So when a heifer first starts cycling, when she first starts producing estrogen,
Yeah.
somewhere along the backbone, there's another star, kind of like the one in the forehead, the adrenal hair whorl. When she first starts producing estrogen, and the bigger the stifle muscle there towards the back end, the more fertile they're going to be. But 3, 4, 5 hairs will stand up in the middle of that adrenal hair whorl because estrogen excited those hairs, and they'll remain standing until within about a month of getting bred, and then they'll all lay down.
Okay.
And then they'll stand back up at 5.5 or 6 months because it takes estrogen to turn the calf
Okay.
to start getting ready to come out, come back up and out. Anyway, at 8 months of pregnancy, maybe before, if the hair is standing on the pole, if there's estrogen involved here, we've excited the hair, is probably going to be a heifer.
Okay.
We've already swaffed the hay, Larry, Curly, and Mo, the mop top, probably going to be a bull. A guy in Texas got 23 out of 24 in a row by looking at that. So that's kind
Cool.
of fun.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when you go home after listening to this, and it makes no sense at all, you can decide not to believe one word that idiot from Idaho is saying.
No, no, no. Thank you. And we actually, my boyfriend and I, we have a bet. We went out there the other day, but we got it. I'm glad that I asked that question because we had it opposite. We're making bets on which ones were standing
Estrogen,
up. Okay.
testosterone.
All right. Perfect. Yeah.
And so
Well,
if we've got a bull with the hair standing up, not producing enough testosterone, you want it laying down and curly on a bull.
okay.
Yep,
All
yep,
right. Awesome.
yep.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really cool. I can't wait to see the calves come out because uh we want to test the theory. It will be fun. Um so just a couple last questions for you, and thank you so much, Steve, for being on here. I really appreciate it and just totally loving everything you're saying. What are some challenges that you see in ag currently? And I ask this question because a lot of our audience and our listeners are maybe a little bit newer into ag or in the last several years and are either interested in starting their own place, starting their own herd, things like that. So what are some challenges that you see in agriculture currently, and then also some advice that you can give to people who want to start their own, whether it's their own ranch, whether it's their own herd, beef business? What's some advice that you would give people kind of wanting to be in agriculture? Specifically cattle.
Well, I kind of want to do the second one first, and it's so
Sure.
capital intensive.
Yeah.
If you can rent some ground to instead of having to own it,
Right.
you being able to have enough money uh, to be able to buy the ground and then buy cows, and then 2 years later you breed them, and then it's almost 3 years later before we've made any meat. The turnaround is so slow. I mean, chickens is real fast. Pigs, lamb, cattle take the longest to return the money.
Yeah.
Uh, so if you could rent the land, and then if you're trying to direct market, I mean, if you're just a price taker, uh, unless you're
Tough.
really well capitalized, that is a tough row to hoe. So if you could cherry pick animals for finishing out of somebody else's herd and work your way into your own cows and calves, if that's your ultimate goal. But cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, that's going to be a problem. You waste money on a lot of things that you don't need to have up front. Clay Conry in the Working Cows podcast, number
Hmm.
250.
Okay.
He had, I don't know, 10 or 12 different people call in, 3 minutes max. What is your advice to someone just starting out? So Working Cows podcast number 250, you get 12 different opinions for somebody just starting out. Challenges for the industry. Stubbornness. That won't work here. We mentioned the Johnson Sioux deal, but there's a couple in Western Australia, the Haggertys. They bought a piece of dirt. I call it dirt because no one could grow anything there.
Hmm.
Then they made a compost tea and inoculated the wheat, and then they and planted it, and then they came and did an in-furrow with another dose of the compost tea, and then they foliered after the wheat was 8 inches tall. It ripened, they harvested, they went to the granary, they got their check, they went to the bank, they now own the piece of ground. They paid it all off, 1 year, one crop. That's not the story. They went out there and they looked, and in every drill row, here is a grass no one had seen in Western Australia in 40 years.
Wow.
It just laid there dormant for 40 years until the soil fertility got high enough. In one growing season, they got the soil fertility high enough that these grasses that should be there in nature that no one hardly knows about anymore, they showed back up. Well, to me, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stick up with what's possible.
Yeah.
But it's really, really hard. The sunken cost fallacy. I own all these tractors and all this farming equipment. If I could sell the majority of it and have a no-till drill,
Yeah.
as a first step. Diversity of species, minimal impact, armor on the soil. There's a number of different philosophies about how to graze. One, this Alejandro Carrillo from the Chihuahuan Desert. Start with your best ground first.
Yeah.
Marginal efficiency of capital or time. If you spend an hour or $1, you get 10 back, 3.25, $1.25, or 95 cents. Don't start on the bad stuff. Start with your best ground. Once you get that biology established there, then you can translocate it out to the surrounding and then translocate that farther. And that's I would listen to him all you can.
Yeah.
But it's hard because we've been told for years and years and years that this is the way you farm. This is the way you ranch. And if you're a rancher and you don't have a big Stetson and a silk scarf and cowboy boots that come up almost to your knee, well, you don't know much about ranching. And I don't mean to belittle buckaroos. Absolute need for them in the picture, but working on the business versus working in the business.
Ranching for profit terminology.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, stories about that. But Todd Churchill gave a talk about social license. So you could just Google Todd Churchill social license. I searched and searched and searched for about an hour one day till I finally found it. So then I put a link on my website. When you Google it, it'll probably be on tailormadecattle.com.
Yeah.
You'll find the link. It's worth listening to. It's a longer story. It's worth listening to. We're kind of losing our social license because there's too many toxins in our food and not enough minerals. And so people are flocking to the farmer's market or somebody that's doing an alternative. I sell you a steak. I'm now partially responsible for your health. Can I sleep at night if I didn't do the best job I could do?
Yeah.
Where they're just get a check at the granary or from the feedlot or whatever, it's out of their hands. When you're direct marketing, you now have direct influence in the health, intelligence, and longevity of your customers' lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's so true. And it's such a responsibility. And I do agree with you. I think that there's a lot of people that are starting to really care a lot more about where their food comes from, the nutrition that they're feeding their family, things like that. And as producers, I think there's a higher level of responsibility. And I talk a lot on the podcast, and I think I released an episode a couple of weeks ago where had a knock on, all this whole idea of, the cows are killing the planet and blah, 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 all that stuff. And that you shouldn't be eating meat and meat's bad for you and, blah, 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 when actually it's essentially a superfood in my opinion. But
tell one more little story.
Yeah, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
There was a lady that had been a long-time customer at the farmer's market, and she came up one day and started ordering. I go, Amy, wait a minute. Hang on. If I forced you to choose between dirty omega 3s, omega 3s are the anti-inflammatory fats. If I made you choose between dirty omega 3s and clean omega 6s, which one would you choose? She goes, well, I'd have to choose the clean omega 6s. And I go, I'm totally with you. All the bad stuff, pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, toxins, and hormones have an affinity for the fat. First place to clean up your diet, organic fat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's so true. Yeah. So one more question. You mentioned a lot of resources and you've said a bunch of different pieces of literature throughout the podcast, which is amazing. But how can we take the old resources, the ones written, 50 years ago or so, and how can those be translated to like the genetic field of today? Totally blanking. There was a book that you had mentioned on the webinar, and I thought I wrote it down. But
Well, if I may,
yes.
if you already know something about a cow,
Uh-huh.
the best book I've ever read is Factors Affecting Calf Crop.
Okay, that was the book. Yes.
Okay, I will send that to you. And then anybody that wants a copy of that can email you or I, and we can pass that along.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be great. So just to go back to that. So when we look at those old resources, are they something that we can read about and then apply it to today? Are most of those things, accurate as of today in terms of the resources that you've mentioned and just what that has been written even back in the 1900s or whenever?
I guess the way I would like to answer that is those resources are the common sense solutions that we're missing out on today. If you took that old information and just was reading in one of these 100-year-old books just the other day, and just to take the topical iodine like teak dip or whatever wound aid sort of stuff, you've got a cow with foot rot. Well, you could doctor the foot rot, but you could pour it down the back like you would Warbex or Sidectin or something like that. The iodine would go in the animal, they would absorb it. We're gonna cure iodine. That was the old-fashioned way. But how much of that did they have? Well, there were fewer toxins and a lot more minerals in the ground, so they did not have much of that.
Yeah.
Alkaline animals tend to resist disease, internal, external parasites.
Okay. Right.
Well, neighbors' toxins drive animals acid. Lack of minerals drive animals acid. Stress, weather stress, unfriendly human interaction, all of those things are driving animals acid. The lower mineralization of your animals, the earlier in fly season and pink eye season, you're going to have that show up on your farm. And the better mineralized your animals, the less fly pressure, and it'll be later in the year before you start having the pink eye. But you can stop it by using the Redmond conditioner. It raises pH, binds the neighbor's toxins. Okay, we got rid of one of the things that drove them acid. Has a bunch of minerals that are not watered down by sodium chloride, and then promotes the growth of the biology in the gut, so the animal digests more out of everything that they ingest.
Okay.
Hey, if we do these things preventatively, we do not have to suffer that pink eye or foot rot again this year. But you will be buying enticer, cracked wheat, cracked barley, cracked corn, soybean meal. If you're a grass finisher, you can't do the grain thing, so there would be other things. But to get enough sea salt and to get enough conditioner in the animals, you'll need some sort of an enticer to get it done. They will not eat enough without enticing.
Okay.
To get health. That cadmium hump that I mentioned, I think at some point, maybe I did or didn't, but You've got a hump from the shoulder blades back to the hook bones in the cow's back. That's the classic cadmium toxicity look. The first thing cadmium does is screws up the cow's ability to regulate internal body temperature. She's too cold in the winter and requires more feed. She's too hot in the summer when the bull shows up and does not get pregnant.
Okay.
So you got 100 cows and you got 3 of those, they're your miner's canary, saying either the neighbor's fertilizer program on the hay that I bought, or some fertilizer that I used, or a mineral. Most 95% of the mixed minerals, they meant to compete on price. They might have a good formula, but to compete on price, minerals out of China, cadmium's in almost every mineral coming out of China.
Okay. So when we're buying mineral made in the USA, is there anything else that we should look? Will it say cadmium free?
Well,
or anything?
made in the USA.
Okay.
So it was assembled, shall we call it, assembled in the USA.
All
Well,
right.
a similar problem is we've got foreign beef that was minimally processed, comes to the US, goes through a plant, and now it's product of USA.
Right.
So you can't even tell that way. So what do I propose? I propose taking 1 part sea salt. Here's the Redmond, but the C90, the Kansas salt. 1 part detox clay. Okay, Redmond conditioner, desert detox, and 1 part enticer. Get them all mixed together. If your cattle are eating 3/4 of a pound a day, 12 ounces, 4 out of 5 places, you've probably fixed your epigenetic problem for the most part. There's some unusual situations. Danger real close. Soybean and corn all the way around you, spraying, runoff, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, if the cattle are eating a pound, use less enticer. If the cattle are eating a half a pound, use more enticer.
Okay.
So you're buying sea salt, you're buying a detox clay, and you're buying enticer. Okay. But you're feeding a lot of it. You're going to need a lot more rim space. You've been using one of these round feeders with the flap on the top. You're going to need at least 3. If 1 was adequate before, you're going to need at least 3 of those, or make some yourself or whatever.
Okay. Okay. So last thing, where can people find you? How can they support you? If people would like to contact you, could you just, if you'd like to share any other business ventures or anything like that you want people to know about you, please do.
So tailormadecattle.com, TAI, like somebody who makes a suit for you, tailormadecattle.com. Phone number 208-315-4726. And my email is steve@tailormadecattle.com. There's a website. There's 10 or 11 recordings of things like this under the videos tab. Yeah, I guess that's awesome. I try to keep my schedule on that website. So I drive everywhere I go now. That's a long story, but I have these big loops that I make. And so if you decide you want me to come and consult on your place, if we can hook it into one of those loops, the travel is so much less than if I just had to go there and come back.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll put that information in the show notes too, so people can find it. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. And this was just like a wealth of knowledge in this little conversation. And I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for being here. And oh, I forgot to ask you, I always ask this last question. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Well, it wasn't a piece of advice that was given to me. It was a question that was asked of me. I was in northeastern Washington State, and on the 3rd day of this ranch visit, the fellow said, what should we stop doing right now? What is the thing that we're doing that's causing us the most trouble? Pareto principle, 20% of your profit is 20% of what you're doing is 80% of your profit. 80% of your problems are in 20% of what you're doing. It's kind of back to ranching for profit. Anyway, I said, well, it's that first thing we said the first day, stop using that bull. We need a different bull. So you'd asked earlier about one of our problems, current problems in ag is we have a lot of bad practices that are destroying the soil rather than the practices that are regenerating. I like what Gabe said. We don't want to sustain a degraded resource. We want to regenerate. So I guess what is it? What is my limiting, Liebig's principle, the short stay? What am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if I change this over here, if I still have that short stave. What should I stop first? Stop plowing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you. I know that question's asked a lot, but I always love to hear people's answers, and I
Was
appreciate
that one
that.
different?
No, that was a different one.
The
Yeah,
different
I
answer.
like it.
Okay.
I like it. That's a great one. It's the first different one we've had. So thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren.